Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your attendance. Right, I'm going to be giving an overview on plant material improvement, why it matters. Right, so to start off, what is plant improvement? Plant improvement is three key things as I see it, or as other people see it. First one is genetic improvement, and then phytosanitary improvement, improving the status of that, and then the third one is to ensure that the standards and the nursery tree that you plant in your orchard provides the right opportunity for you to make money, to produce, and particularly in those first 6 years of the establishment of an orchard. So if we go to genetic improvement, what is that? And this is an area obviously that is very close to most of your hearts, and Marcus is going to be talking to this in detail. But I think not necessarily going through each one of these aspects, you can read them, is that genetics gives you the opportunity of addressing major issues. So if we're talking about adaptation, genetics gives the opportunity of creating or breeding lower till cultivars, which allows you to adapt. So it is the key driver of plant improvement. It is not the only thing. So if we look at what is the pathway of plant materials, so if you don't have to look at every single element of that flow diagram, but I think what is important to understand, and this is in support of the IP owners that bring many cultivars through, is from the point of where that cultivar is identified. Now remember, if you look at the source of the breeder, there's 10 to 15 years of developing that cultivar. So once that cultivar has been developed, it takes close on 10 years to actually get it into the system. Going through plant quarantine is hopefully a 2 or 3 year process, but basically you need to graft a bud onto a rootstock, grow it out, and then test that to make sure that you don't have a quarantine organism. Then it goes through an evaluation process, and if you want to register it on the official variety list, you need 3 years of data to go through the DIS, and that means that the plant or the cultivar that you bring in needs to be distinct. Dit moet verskil van sy maatjie. It needs to be uniform and it needs to be stable. So those are the things that need to happen, and then only then do you start entering into the certification process. So this is a long process, it's a deep process. If we look at that period of 19 years, an average of 279 cultivars came into South Africa on a yearly basis. 200 pome fruit, 79 stone fruit. Of those, 5.5% landed as clones that were registered. And the question then is, how many of those then became successful? So I think just to get a sense of the enormity of the number of cultivars and the processes that go through before you get something that is adaptable and suitable for your own area. If you look at locally developed cultivars, there's a higher percentage in terms of those that make it, basically because it's been developed or selected in South Africa, so we assume that it is more climate adapted. So, what is the role of cultivar development from an industry's perspective? Where are we involved? Now, up until about 2017, 2020, the industry funded the ARC breeding program, and for stone fruit, it absorbed about 70% of the funding. A decision was made, it took a long time to get to that point, where the industry decided that the focus area in terms of industry funds needs to be on an area where growers were losing money and from planting cultivars that weren't suitably adapted and suitable. So there was a shift then towards supporting independent scientific evaluation. And industry's role within that process is an enabling one, so providing 11 sites, Prohort sites, that were done in conjunction with Provar. We have 2 projects, a screening project and also a tasting project, which is hopefully moving more cultivars through the process. And maybe just to give one slide, Yvonne might show the slide later, but in terms of what is the value of the independent evaluation to industry. And if you look at the number of cultivars that Yvonne and his team have evaluated, and 88% of those didn't make it. So the IP owners withdrew their cultivars based on the evidence of the work that was done there. So those are potentially, not all of them, some of those might have landed, and that, as far as we're concerned, is the big value. So industry is also, a number of them are in the audience today. We got groups of experts together and drafted a cultivar matrix, which is on our website. You can have a look at that, which basically identifies what one's looking for in new cultivars. So it's kind of almost a wish list in terms of where the gaps are. So that's evaluated. That is a useful tool for breeders, for evaluators, and it gives an indication. So Codevco, which is an industry-based organization, and commercializes the cultivars that come out of the ARC. And we know that there's not much coming through at the moment, and we're trusting that Codevco will be able to access those cultivars, but there's a stream of existing cultivars within the process. And then SAPA is also involved in the movement and the identification of cultivars. So if we look at that is where we as industry involved, and see our role more as an enabler than a player. Clean planting material. So I've spent the last 2-3 years of my working life looking at planting material and clean plant material. So the phytosanitary status of the planting material. So why are clean plants important? Now, this should be fairly obvious to most of us. And in terms of the first issue on viruses, Professor Gerard Peterson is going to be talking to that as well. But we know that with viruses, you can't nie 'n virus doodspuit nie. So the only opportunity that you have of starting clean is to start with material that doesn't have viruses in it. And the impact of viruses is, so viruses, and we're seeing it particularly with some of the new rootstocks that are coming through that are more virus sensitive than some of our older rootstocks. So it has an impact on bud take, it has an impact on early production, it has an impact on yield. So you can get between a 10 and a 40% decrease in yield. And a lot of it is not seen because what are you comparing against? And there's trials being done which basically demonstrate the differences. And I think there's technical people in the field who have good experiences with that. In the end, it's about risk mitigation. So when you're investing in the order of R1 million or more or less in a hectare, can you afford to take the risk with a virus that we know, it's not unknown, we've known it for 50, 100 years that they have an impact. You spend over 50,000 rand a hectare on fumigation to ensure that you get your trees started off. This is in the same category. So very important that one looks at the quality of your planting material and the internal quality, the stuff that you can't see, is not visual. So apart from viruses, it's nematodes, it's crown galls, Phytophthora, stem cankers. In terms of, there was work done by, where is she? Morset, yeah, there we go. Professor Morset, looking at stem cankers, 60% of nursery trees, particularly where you make a wound, had the presence of stem cankers. So there are ways of addressing that. So start clean. How you achieve it is up. There's different opportunities. So tissue culture in pots. Looking purely from a phytosanitary perspective is the opportunity of ensuring that along the track until you get the tree, that there's a low chance of contamination. So if you start with virus-tested trees in the nucleus, and you go through a tissue culture process, and if you go to micrografting, where you do soft tip grafting, even better, you stand a better chance of starting with a clean tree. And there's cost implications, but you need to look at the cost benefit of that process, and particularly where there's such a pressure on growers to achieve those early productions. So the sustainability of your orchard is dependent to an extent on those first 6 years. So if we look at clean material, and clean is a relative word within the context and where we are right now, plant quarantine, or the Department of Agriculture's key responsibility is to make sure that we don't get any quarantine diseases into the industry. The citrus industry, after 20 years, has now got a statutory certification scheme based on HLB, which is a disease that has wiped out the Florida citrus industry. 20% of this Florida citrus industry is left as a result of HLB. We don't have such devastating ones. There's plum pox. So home 8, that's the first step. The second step in terms of the South African situation is the scheme, the certification scheme that operates under the Plant Improvement Act of 1976. And the DPA, the Deciduous Fruit Plant Improvement Association, was initiated in 1993, and it is the custodian of that process. We doen ons eintlik baie swak. Currently, we're sitting at 64% uncertified. Only 36% of our material is actually certified, and we have one happy face there, and that's plums, and that is based mostly on the fact that we had plum marbling disease, which had a tremendous impact on growers, and the only way that you can actually address that is to start with a clean material. So the plum viroid, you can only do it spadely, you have to take your tree out. So the scheme gives the opportunity of making sure, hopefully, that your material is clean. So whether you do it through the scheme or not, make sure your material is clean. That's the question. So if you look at the evolution of, or the status of plant material over the last 20-odd years, we had a peak in 1986, where 86% of our material was certified. Now, it's not all bad, not all uncertified material is bad, and there's various reasons why the material is uncertified. One of the challenges that we have is you saw how long it takes to bring a cultivar through, is that there's this huge turnover of cultivars. So by the time you get into the certification scheme, the volgende cultivar is chasing you. So from an industry's perspective, what did we do? Saying, well, at 35%, a third of your material, you actually don't have a scheme. Do you need a scheme? Is the key question. And it's the growers who need to decide whether we need a scheme or not. It's not Hortgrow or not the department. We did an international benchmarking exercise where we looked at 10 certification schemes around the world. We traveled to Europe and looked at most probably the top 3. Lactainbo in Holland is most probably the leader of certification schemes. We then drafted an implementation plan and a business plan in terms of the service. ISP is independent service provider. So what are the main features of the scheme? Every scheme in the world, South African scheme, every scheme has the same basic principle. And it's a very simple principle based on the fact that you can't test every single tree that comes through a nursery. It's net te veel bome, kos te veel. So it's a systems approach to addressing the problem. Start clean, end clean. If you remember one thing out of my presentation, it's that. Start clean, end clean. So you start with a nucleus plant that you make sure is clean. If it's not clean, you clean it up through thermotherapy. Thermotherapy is where you put a plant in a growth chamber, you heat it up so it grows like hell, and as it's growing, it outgrows the virus, Professor. It outgrows the virus, and then they snip it off just before the virus catches it, and you use that little bit of the uchi through tissue culture to multiply. And it's been proven that that is a very successful way of removing viruses, not viroids. Right, so it's a simple process of nucleus. From one tree, you make 10 trees. From 10 trees, you make 100 trees. And from there, you go further depending on how many you require. So if you look at the key elements of the Dutch scheme, not Tuinbouw, most important thing is it's an independent service provider that provides a service to a multitude of IP owners. They have a certification, inspection, diagnostic center. It's a center of excellence in terms of diagnostics. So diagnostics is basically a lab where you diagnose who's skoon is goed. A PATH solutions, a PATH, same kind of process. Have you got coronavirus, yes or no? Gaan toets. Same process. So I'm not going to go through the detail of that. It's very similar to the systems that we have. Nucleus facility, so that's a nucleus facility. So you keep 2 plants in the nucleus facility in an insect-proof net so it can't get reinfected. You test it on a yearly basis. En dit is jou skoon bron. As iets nou verkeerd gaan, dan gebruik jy daai and you start again. So most probably the biggest difference between our system and the system that we saw in Holland, different scenario, bigger volumes, we understand that, is that it's illegal to cut budwood in orchards in terms of the certification scheme. So the focus, so all their budwood is grown in, and that's a bud park. A bud park which is focused purely on producing budwood, and they replace that every 5 years. So you're continuously replacing with clean material. Is 5 years feasible? Maybe it's 10 years, depending on the viruses, depending on where you are. So, what are the proposed changes to the scheme? The PIPS, Plant Improvement Process Plan, first of all, is to increase the quality of clean plant material, increase the efficiency, and decrease the timeline. That's the biggest factor for IP managers, IP owners. Every year costs a lot of money. And then a byvoordeel is to increase the level of certification. So in terms of the scheme, we believe that we have to press the restart button. Gerard is going to show you some results of a trial that we did where one realizes that there's a lot of infected material in the industry. So we believe that that's where we need to start. We need an independent lab and nucleus facility. We would like to combine the quarantine and scheme and run a parallel service so that we can hopefully increase the efficiencies of that process, but that is a longer process. So there is a refocusing process within SAPO to help address that aspect. And a focus on start clean, end clean. There's new technology in terms of testing, next-gen sequencing, very expensive, 8,000 Rand a test, but it gives you the opportunity of doing a broad range of diseases that you can identify. Whereas currently, for PCR or ELISA, you focus on one virus. So you stick for the I virus, and if it gets it, then it's a positive. It doesn't look at the other stuff. NGS is a database that you can explore to identify. So, and then a focus, and this is a focus that was initiated some time ago in terms of bud parks, and to move our process over to that. Of course, there's an issue also relating to selection of colored varieties that one needs to manage in the process. In terms of inspection, already Plant SA has taken over the responsibility of inspection, auditing really, and there's a proposal that 64% of your material is not being inspected, should be inspected by the Department of Agriculture, And in terms of capacity challenges, it's not being inspected. So to include that within the process, so that is also audited, so that you have a differentiation in terms of whether you want to go for an elite, a certified thing, where you know it's been tested for viruses, or just a standard that hasn't been tested but is visually free of diseases. So, based on a user pay process, that's the plan. So, last slide coming up, Mr. Chair. Take-home message is 3. Start with the right genetics. End with the same genetics. So make sure that, and that's part of the scheme, is to make sure that if you order X, that you actually get X, not X, Y, and Z. So the scheme is very clear on that. Start clean, end clean. So that's the question that you need to be asking your nurseryman. What route it followed is part of the process, but it's not the only answer. If those trees are being tested and you know that they're clean of the viruses, go for it. If they're not, you're running a risk. And the last one is start with the right nursery tree that gives you the capability of achieving the objectives that you require. And there's lots of people that can tell you what that looks like. And then hopefully you will end well. A happy story in the end. So we have 2 publications, very good publications, fresh quarterlies that look into this in detail. And there's also 3, in English and Afrikaans, articles on what is a virus, what is a virus, and the economics and demystifying tests. That's on our website. So it takes a while to read them, to understand them, but gives you a greater understanding. So, tick-tock. That is it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.